श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। हरिः ओम्। गणानां त्वा गणपतिगुं हवामहे कविं कवीनामुपमश्रवस्तमम् ज्येष्ठराजं ब्रह्मणां ब्रह्मणस्पत आनशृण्वन्नोतिभिः सीदसादनम् महागणपतये नमः। प्रणो देवी सरस्वती वाजेभिर्वाजिनीवती धीनामवित्र्यवतु आनो दिवो बृहतः पर्वतादा सरस्वती यजता गन्तु यज्ञम् हवन् देवी जुजुषाणा घृताचीषग्मान्नो वाचमुशती शृणोतु वाग्देव्यै नमः। ॐ भूर्भुवः सुवः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात्। ॐ त्र्यम्बकं यजामहे सुगन्धिं पुष्टिवर्धनम् उर्वारुकमिव बन्धनान् मृत्योर्मुक्षीयमामृतात्। ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। जय श्री कृष्णा सभी को। आज हमारे जो अतिथि हैं वो हैं मंडला रामदास और उनको वो अंग्रेजी में ही बोलेंगे तो मैं अब अंग्रेजी में ही आज है ये। So today's guest is Mandal Ram. I met him in the mall and I have invited him. So he's already arrived. So without delay, welcome to our panel, Mandal Ram.
Hare Krishna, Preeti.
Hare
I'm
Krishna.
just trying to log in here. It's such a pleasure to see you and to have me on the show here. For some reason, the microphone isn't working so nicely.
We can hear you very well.
Yes.
And we
for
are
some reason.
Blessed to have you on our channel, and our channel
Maybe
is
I'll have
blessed
to
by you.
relog in here.
But we can hear you perfectly.
Let me log back in here, Preeti. It seems to be
Okay.
glitching out the system.
Okay. So all of you are requested to please ask your questions in the end. And please like, share, and subscribe. And please, I want to see many people here. There are only 16 people watching. Please send the message so that more people can join. Dikshit ji is busy, I think, because I sent her an email yesterday.
Hare Krishna?
Hare Krishna.
There we go. I can hear you now. So nice to see you, Preeti. Thank you so much for having me on the show and doing this wonderful live session that you have going on every day.
Yes, we finished the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita reading, and now we are doing the Rig Veda and the Ramayana, half hour shows.
Wow.
So I would, since I don't know anything about your background, I would like to request you to tell us from the beginning, like where were you born, and then how is it that this you are presently in Iskon. For the sake of the audience, I would tell them that I would like to say that Mandala Ramdas ji is from Iskon, Ottawa, Canada. And since my audience is mostly from India, and some are from the US, and they're all mixed, but majority are from India. I would like to request you to tell us from the beginning, like how was your family, and where were you born, and what faith your family was in, and what uh, lured you to Iskon and etc. So your spiritual journey.
Well, first, I would like to offer my appreciation to you, to all the teachers in my life that have given me some spiritual knowledge and directed me on a path ultimately towards God. And I was born in Canada, so I grew up in Ontario, small town, but I had a little bit of a unique birth, I guess we could say. My mother, she met Hare Krishna devotees. So when Preeti was saying ISKCON, what does that? Some people may know, but ultimately that's an acronym for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And she met these Hare Krishna devotees when she was 20, and from there she got inclined towards the most beautiful book available, the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. And from there, that gave her an insight towards a different dimension of what spiritual life has to offer. Previously, she was raised Catholic, the traditional upbringing in the West, and a lot around the world is the Abrahamic religions. And so naturally, my mother, practiced to whatever degree she was inspired by, following Lord Jesus and so forth. And sh when she heard the wisdom coming from the Bhagavad Gita, and then also from great souls that she came in contact with, that gave a deeper understanding of what is true spirituality. And the Bhagavad Gita touches on some of those points, such as we're not these bodies. We're actually eternal spiritual beings. And the ultimate, and from that vantage point, that we are spiritual by nature, the nature of the soul is to serve. That is our constitutional position. And when she heard that from the devotees, along with all these things like karma, reincarnation, uh, to cultivate an ahimsa lifestyle, this lifestyle of nonviolence. Ultimately, that includes a diet that is conducive for that. So after hearing that knowledge, she took it up full force. She became fully engaged in spiritual life. So she raised all of her children with a completely pure vegetarian diet, which is no meat, fish, or eggs. She raised them all with Sanskrit names, so she gave all of us Sanskrit names from birth. So my full name is actually Mandala Chaitahari Vamsadari, John McAllister, because I was still I'm baptized. Um, so, and then I have many other siblings as well. My mother, she really followed this principle of ultimately to bring God conscious children in the world uh, is something that the world very much needs, and that can keep the world afloat in turmoil situations as we see now. Pretty, yes.
I just wanted to ask you a small question. What about your dad? Was he a Catholic, or is he a Catholic, or is he also a Hare Krishna?
Yeah, so he was also similar background for both of them. That he was a Catholic as well, and this is the unique point about looking at spiritual life through the lens of the Vedic paradigm, which is that we start to appreciate the universal spiritual principles of all traditions. And I grew up, in this certain situation, but also like a typical, say, like person who grows up in Hinduism or in Vedic culture, you see your parents doing, weird stuff. They have the deities, they have these things, and you don't understand the spiritual science behind it when you're a child, maybe because you didn't ask, you weren't interested. But then once I started to get a little older in age, I met also some monks, and then I started to inquire myself about What is this about? How does that work? This doesn't make sense. Please explain it to me. Then the whole wisdom started to unfold a lot more. But it actually, from hearing it from the perspective of the Bhagavad Gita and this beautiful book called the Srimad Bhagavatam, it helped me develop actually more of an appreciation for the spiritual culture of like Christianity. Lord Jesus, I completely believe that he's the son of God, but when we look at it from the vantage point of Vedanta, that we see that God descends according to time, place, circumstance, to help the people of that particular area or nature to try to develop God consciousness or love for God, love for the Supreme. So it's not that we have to be at quarrels ends with one another. There may be subtle differences, but the ultimate thing, at least from the Bhakti perspective, this is strictly the Bhakti perspective within the whole yoga culture, within the Vedic culture, that we will find those universal spiritual truths. And ultimately, the gold standard of any religious spiritual practice is unmotivated, uninterrupted service to the Supreme, to God. We say to Bhagavan, the one who possesses all opulences or all qualities incomplete. So I kind of went off a little bit there just to
So
make a
when in
specific point.
school, did children know that you were from a different faith, or did they tease you or bully you or whatever?
Um, so back to kind of my family history was that my mother following this principle of like just trying to bring God conscious children in the world. That I actually have 12 siblings altogether. That's including me as well. So we have. You want me to list them off? in
No,
in
whatever you say.
in essence, so she named us all with Sanskrit names. So pretty much me growing up in the West, I was removed from like I lived far away from Toronto, about 2 hours from there, about 3 hours from Ottawa, and I was just in a small town population about 1,000. And pretty much we just had our family there. So my seven
What's the name of the
brothers.
place? Was
Uh,
it Sudbury? No.
no, it's called Norwood. It's near
Okay.
Peterborough,
Oh,
Ontario.
yeah.
So it's a little
Oh,
small
I
town
know.
outside there.
I know because my husband is from Deep River.
Okay, okay, nice. So it's just a little small town there, and so I went to Catholic school growing up. We went to Roman Catholic school, and I kind of had a little tinge of this like mix of spirituality coming from the East, but then mainly just going in it from the Western perspective. I grew up with all the normal kids doing normal activities, but still confused because I grew up pure vegetarian. I had these weird names, and sometimes I'd see my mother offering arti at home, but that was the extent of my spiritual insight towards Vedic knowledge and so on. Um, so since I had such a big family, no one really teased us so much. We were just friendly kids, normal kids with weird names, and that were vegetarians. That was really our only difference. So I was lucky in that sense. Maybe some other people uh, may have experienced that. That grow up in these Vaishnava families. So within the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, Srila Prabhupada, he was one of these great bhakti yoga masters, I like to say, that came from India to spread this process of bhakti or divine love in the heart for God to the Western world. So when he came, he passed it on to some eager students in the 60s and 70s. So then those were like the first generation of devotees in the Western world. White-bodied people, so on. But then those practitioners or people trying to imply bhakti in their life, then they had children and then they tried to pass it on to the children. So I would technically be like a second generation devotee, and then my daughter, her name is Avatar, she'd be a third generation. So then try to pass on this tradition, this sweet tradition of bhakti to the next generation so that we can expand Vedic knowledge in this mood of like non-sectarian, but trying to get to the essence and understand what is tattva, what is truth, what is the absolute truth. um so ultimately, yeah, we just grew up in a normal situation. I'm trying to mend some spiritual knowledge with my upbringing because they kind of coincide. So ultimately grew up a normal child, uh just with a weird name, vegetarian, so on. Did all the things that a Western goes up, went to parties, trying to, find satisfaction through relationships. Ultimately, that falls short because we're just trying to satisfy the senses and leaving it the component of what is the soul's nature. And ultimately, the soul's nature is to serve, and that's how we feel satisfied. So when I was fed up with material life or the struggle of material life, trying to enjoy it through my senses, then um, my mother, because she was always trying to incline me towards spiritual life, but I wasn't having any of it. I wasn't so inclined and so forth growing up. But then I got into some trouble, and long story short, she grounded me for a week to my room. And then she told me, if you read this book, you can get off your grounding earlier. And it kind of was like wisdom like the Bhagavad Gita. It kind of put me on a spiritual direction where I had this uh, excitement to see, whoa, this is what India has to offer. The spiritual culture of India has to offer. Uh, I would really like to go there and see it. So then, since she had connections with Hare Krishna devotees, this sannyasi, this great soul Bhakti Marga Swami, he he's been a lifelong brahmachari, so a Nishtaka brahmachari, and he's just his only mission in life is to spread love of God, to all those who he meets. He's also known as the walking monk, which he's walked across Canada 4 times, Israel, Ireland, Guyana, Trinidad, Tobago, Cuba, and most recently he did a walk across the United States, which he also invited me to come along with. So I got to trek with him. But he was the one who my mother connected with and told that Mandala, he has some desire to see India, to get some insight. And he just so openly said, hey, come along with me. You can go traveling to India. So that was when in 2015 when I was 20. And that was really my first entry point into the deep spiritual culture of India. And that's really when my spiritual life actually started.
So where did you go in India? You went to Delhi or which part of India?
So, uh, coming from a big family, I didn't we didn't travel much on airplanes and so on. Try to fit 12 kids on an airplane, unless you're a trillionaire, might be a little difficult. So, I was actually never on an airplane previously. So, my first flight ever was straight to Kolkata. We had a better layover in London. Then from London, we went to Kolkata, and we went to this most sacred holy dham called Sri Dham Mayapur. And this is like the ground zero of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, the Hare Krishna movement, the Sankirtan movement, where we go around singing the glories of Sri Krishna through the mantra. Most of you probably know it, but I'll say it just for anyone who doesn't. This Maha mantra is known as Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And this place, Mayapur, is where this uh, movement of chanting the glories of God kind of came from through mantra known as the Maha Mantra. And Mayapur is actually the headquarters of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, where they're building the temple of the Vedic planetarium. So, to my knowledge, uh, it's actually the biggest temple being built across the world, and it's to show the understanding of the cosmos, of the creation, according to this beautiful book called the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the first canto in that talks about creation, so forth. There we go. We got it. We got our uh, Preeti's on the ball here, where she's showing this. This is Sridham Mayapur, which is, if anyone has not been there, it's a must see. It's one of the most sacred places to go on pilgrimage, and you'll meet people from all over the world because the International Society for Krishna Consciousness is literally international. Wherever you go in the world, whether it's in Germany, China, Japan, Russia, Brazil, anywhere, you'll find a Iskon temple, a Hare Krishna temple, and you'll see people coming from all walks of life. I remember the first year I went there, I walked in and I didn't know what was going on so much, but I saw this group of almost 100 Asian bodied people, Chinese bodied people, and they're all coming with their tilak on, their kurtas, their dhotis, their little japa beads, and so on. And they're all traveling as a group through Shudan Mayapur. So it's a wonderful place to go, not only to sightsee, but really to immerse oneself in this bhakti culture and feel connected to uh, this really sweet practice of bhakti. So that was the first place I went to, and then I stayed there for about 4 weeks, and then we went to Sri Vrindavan Dham. So I'm sure everyone in India has heard of Vrindavan. This is a holy place of Lord Krishna's pastimes when he appeared on this world 5,000 years ago, just to bring pleasure to his devotees and to um, bring some excitement there, to have some loving exchanges and adventures with his pure devotees. So I went to Vrindavan, and then from there I've kind of went to different places around India. Before COVID, I was going every single year, and since COVID, I haven't been back since because no one was traveling during that time, and now I've kind of picked up some other services here in in Ottawa. But yeah, so that was kind of like my initial entrance into Krishna consciousness or this practice of bhakti. And I guess maybe I could ask you a question if that's okay, Preeti. I would really like to know because we just somehow miraculously met uh, when I was doing a service of picking up some groceries for the temple, and somehow you just came up. You said Hare Krishna, so enthusiastically asking about oh, you're part of Iskon, so on and so forth. And then we got talking for I don't even know, maybe it was a half an hour in the store. We just lost track of time. And so what mainly because I see a lot of the programming here is in Hindi, and I'm learning Hindi, but I'm not quite proficient in reading it like that. But what is the program here? What is this that you're sharing with all the audience, and then I can know to tailor some conversation to that as well.
So every 7:30 p.m. we have a stream, and generally we invite guests from, like we have debates with the Islamic people. Then we bring in guests who have special knowledge about a certain area of spirituality, and so on. So we
Mm,
do many streams,
okay,
and
so you're always having
Tuesday we have a,
conversations.
yes, and Tuesday we have like something on Sanatan Dharma, where we answer questions on Sanatan Dharma. Generally Muslims have questions on Sanatan Dharma, so we answer them on Tuesday.
Very nice. Questioning is a sign of intelligence, and it's important to
Yes.
understand what is what. And you know, I always like to say because the bhakti culture is really trying to get to the essence of what is true spirituality. Ultimately, in a very short, compact form, it's to understand we're an individual soul. We're not God. We are a minute part and parcel of God. There's us, there's God, and what's our relationship? And through the practice of bhakti, can we can cultivate this real sweet love in the heart for God. So I see someone's asking a question here that
Yes,
Preeti posted up.
Sanatan Commando has asked a question that which chapter in the Bhagavad Gita is good for school going students for better concentration?
I would say to help for the students for better concentration, really it's to help understand the difference between what is this body, what is the mind, and who we are. So separating these components. So there's the sixth chapter, which is Dhyana Yoga, and then at least in the English translation that I read, I'll give it in the English term. Then there's the seventh chapter, which is the knowledge of the absolute. So these two chapters are super good because in the sixth chapter. Arjuna's posing this question to Krishna that you're telling me to do all this intense yoga, austerity, going off to the forest and so on. But for me, this is very difficult for me to do. I don't have this adhikari. I don't have this qualities to really just go off to the forest, sit on a deerskin mat, and meditate entirely on Bhagavan. And so, please tell me, my mind is harder to control than the wind. Uh, or Arjuna says, Chanchalam hi mana Krishna pramati balavadradam tasyaham nigraham manye vayoriva sadushkaram. So this is in the 6th chapter. And Arjuna asks, Krishna, my mind is so turbulent, it's so obstinate, it's harder to control than the wind. Well, what can I do about this? And then Krishna tells him, well, by the practice of yoga, by steady practice and detachment, then you can conquer over the mind. So ultimately, uh, that's infused with a sadhana, a daily spiritual practice, which we can see the difference between this physical body, the subtle body, which is the mind, and then the soul, what we're really meant to connect with. And finding those three distinguishing differences will help with concentration, which also, when you read the 6th chapter, they talk about the mind, how it's all over the place. But then in the 7th chapter, to really understand and distinguish those differences, in chapter 7, text 4, Krishna is telling Arjuna these differences. He says, Bhumir apanalovayu kam mono buddhir evacha ahankara iti yame bina prakritir ashtada. So understanding what this body is made up of. It's the gross physical elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether. And then the subtle body, which is made up of the mind, the intelligence, the false ego. this These 8 elements constitute the gross and subtle nature of the living entity, but they're Krishna's separated material energies. So they're a material energy ultimately, but the mind is subtle, the body's physical. And then he says, but to understand there's a superior energy to these, which is comprised of the living entities. So it's of a spiritual nature. So helping students, they're under so much pressure. They're just, especially in India, I know there's so much competition there that it's so essential to
So beautifully
add.
explained. Yes.
Well, the
He got
Bhagavad
his
Gita does it
answer
all.
so beautifully explained. You speak so good Sanskrit. Did you learn Sanskrit also along with Hindi?
Well, simultaneously, within the Hare Krishna movement, we the main process is Shravanam and then Kirtanam. So we listen constantly to transcendental sound vibration, the spiritual knowledge coming from the Vedas. We definitely emphasize on the essence of that, which is the Bhagavad Gita. That's the crest jewel of India's spiritual knowledge. Really compacted, but then the follow up after the Bhagavad Gita, because the Bhagavad Gita is presented Krishna speaking all this knowledge, and then he departs from this world, and then people are like, now what? Now what do we do? And then the Srimad Bhagavatam comes after that. And then just by hearing Sanskrit, it eventually just sinks in. And then if we can, try learning some key shlokas or key verses, we can relate them to our everyday life, and then those will be the things that are kind of reeling in our mind rather than things that come up when we cultivate a material mindset, that like hate, envy, anger, uh spite. These are the negative qualities of the material mind, and we really want to cultivate these divine spiritual qualities which come from hearing truth, spiritual truth, and then applying that to our lives, which that can actually transform our material consciousness to genuine spiritual consciousness. So this Sanskrit has a tremendous effect on affecting the consciousness. So I see so many questions reeling up here. Preeti, you're the host, so please read them to me, and then I can try to
Yeah.
address them to whatever degree.
Another question by the same person, Sanatan Commando. He asked what do you like about Sanatan and what changes you would like to see in Hindus?
Wow, beautiful question. So what do I like about Sanatana, and what changes would I like to see in Hindus? I don't know how this is all going to gel up, on the chat board, but I'm going to say it as it is because this is what I've heard
Yes.
from my great teachers. That first, I'll address the Hindus part. Is what is Hindus? Ultimately, from my understanding, it's a name that's given to people of the area that were near the river Sindhu, and then it's taken on the name Hindus. And in when I'm out in the world and I'm sharing the Bhagavad Gitas with people doing Sankirtan, uh, they'll ask me, "Are you Hindu?" And I'll say, "What's a Hindu mean to you?" And then usually they'll say, "Oh, you guys worship a bunch of demigods and all this, that." So ultimately, that's not where Sanatana Dharma is leading one towards. Sanatana Dharma, what is Dharma? There's a couple different translations, but Dharma is, you can say it as duty, occupation, engagement. There's a couple words that you have to really mend in together to try to understand it in English. But Sanatan Dharma, Sanatana is eternal. So what is Srila Prabhupada, our founder Acharya in the Krishna consciousness movement, he'd translate Sanatana Dharma as what is the eternal occupation or what is the eternal duty of the soul? It's meant to serve the supreme. And ultimately, when you come to the Vedas, a lot of it can be tipsy turvy. There's a lot of uncertainties if we don't get it passed down by great souls. So the conclusion is that God is one. There's one God, and we say in our tradition we say that supreme enjoyer is named Krishna. Krishna. That's another name for God. There's many names for God. God is unlimited. He has unlimited names. But in the Bhakti tradition, we say God's name is Krishna. You can say Bhagavan, so on. And from the Bhakti culture, we'll say, some people will say Allah, some people will say this, but we say Krishna. That specifically addresses the transcendental qualities of the Supreme Being in complete full. He's completely beautiful. He's all intelligent. He's completely wealthy in full, fully renounced, fully famous. These are qualities of God, and that's what Krishna means. So ultimately, I want to see, or what is true, is in Sanatana Dharma, it talks about the eternal nature of the soul. It gets to the essence of who we are, being an individual jiva soul, and we're meant to serve the supreme. So Sanatana Dharma, what is the constitutional position of the soul? Is to serve. We see it translated in this world, whether we're serving our senses, which that's what most people are serving our senses, serving our family, serving our government, serving our job, our country, serving our religion. But ultimately, the service propensity is there, and that's meant to be directed towards Bhagavan, towards God. So that's my understanding of what Sanatana Dharma is. The eternal duty or occupation of the soul is to serve Bhagavan. And then what would we like to see change in Hindus? It's focus on the essence. Get right to the source. There is such thing as demigod worship. And this might be a big combatant point for other spiritual traditions that they see, most people are just worshiping demigods. They're not worshiping the one supreme God. They're not worshiping that source of all existence. So understand how we understand the bhakti tradition is that God is one, and that one supreme personality, because he's a person, but a transcendental person, not subjected to birth, old age, disease, death like we are, but that one supreme being, all things emanate from him. Everything material, everything spiritual. And these things like demigods are empowered personalities, empowered beings in charge of universal affairs, which we respect them. We worship them as servants of the supreme, but they're not the supreme, and that's an important factor to know. They're not, the supreme being. So I hope that helps. And then, if people are practicing, let's just say Hinduism, just for terminology, or Sanatana Dharma, understand that we want to connect everything back to, I'll say Krishna because that's a name for God. We want to connect everything back to Bhagavan. Is that okay? I think you're on mute
Yeah.
there, Preeti.
Logicwala has asked a question earlier, and I answered from your on your behalf. That was a while ago. He was typing. So he says, "What is Atma made of?"
The Atma. Wow, look at all these comments
There's
here. This is
energy.
amazing. So the Atma. Some people, so there's different schools of thoughts within Sanatana Dharma that what is the Atma? Ultimately, the we have to understand God in three features because God is not just God is not just energy. He's not just energy. But when we understand God in truth, in the absolute truth, we understand in three features that God is, for one, Brahman. He's the all pervasive energy, which is present, you know, everywhere, everywhere. And most people want to connect to that all pervasive energy of God. The second feature of the absolute truth is Paramatma, the localized aspect of the supreme personality. We say there's the Jiva, the Atma, and then there's the Paramatma. And that's God residing in the heart. And then the third feature of God is Bhagavan, the supreme person, the supreme being. And what is the Atma made of? What is its constituents? Is that the Atma is completely pure spiritual energy. That we are individual parts and parcels of God. So within the Hare Krishna tradition, we will say that the tattva, what is the truth? That achintya abeda beda tattva. We're not God, but we're simultaneously God, but different from God. Meaning, in quality, we are pure, made of pure spiritual energy, which is God's energy, and that's what the Atma is. It's complete spiritual energy, and then simultaneously we're different, meaning we don't have the same uh, quantity as God. It's not as vast as God's unlimited energy where he expands himself energy. We're just a little, drop in the ocean. You could give that comparison, but we are not the ocean. We're just a little individual soul. And Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita in the second chapter, when he's explaining to Arjuna on the battlefield, what's going to happen here? Krishna says, "Natu evaham jatu nasam, natwam nimi janadhipaha, nachaiva na bhavishyamaha sarve vayamataparam." That ultimately, there never was a time when these kings did not exist, Arjuna. Nor you, nor me. We're all eternal, individual living entities. And being an individual entity, the prime duty is to connect back to God through bhakti, through transcendental, loving, devotional service. Devotion to God. And that's how you connect to God. You could try, if someone has the other, you could try to do great mystic, austerities, going off to the forest, so on. But the essence is that God is a being, and ultimately, what satisfies us is loving relationships. And similarly, God, being the supreme being, he lives off of loving adventure, exchanges with his devotees. So, I
You know,
see there's just questions flowing in. Please
yeah,
carry
there's
on.
so many. But I have a question too over here. Like when you was mentioning about the second chapter, most people, especially Muslims, they try and compare that Krishna when he asked Arjun to go and fight the war. These people compare that to jihad, and they say, "Look, if in our books it is written that do jihad, then even in your books it is written that Krishna said to Arjun, go and fight." So, what is the difference?
So, the difference is that within the realm of the Vedic paradigm, that we have this varna and ashrama. So, according to one's varna, which is according to my psychophysical nature, I have a certain propensity to work in this world, whether it's a Shudra, meaning I just like to work with my hands and serve others. I'm happy with that. Whether it's a Vaishya, I'm a businessman. I work in this world. I have that proclivity. Whether I'm a Kshatriya, which is like an administrator or, a protector of society, a warrior, or a Brahmana. So Arjuna, he was by nature a Kshatriya. He was a king. He was a ruler. He was meant to protect his citizens, but based on dharma, based on uh, you know principles that are to assist to lead people towards God. So leading society in a way that direct people back towards their spiritual aspirations in life and protect the citizens so that they can march towards that.
Yes.
And within this context of Krishna telling Arjuna to fight is because that's his nature, is to protect them. He could not just run off to the forest because that's not his adhikar. That's not his nature to do that. Otherwise, he'll go off to the forest and he'll become like
Yeah, it was
uh,
a righteous war. It was a righteous war between dharma and adharma. Whereas jihad is a political agenda to capture other people's land, and this was a righteous war.
you would know much more about that than I would. I don't know. I know, and this is where we have to be careful. Is within Vedic culture, Hinduism, whatever you want to call it, if we start taking up the militant notions as I'm going to fight because my religion is right and I want to dominate others and convert them to that, that's not religion. That just ruins it all. So whether you're a Hindu, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Muslim, whether you're Zoroastrian, if you're doing that, that is not the correct mentality for God realization. At least from my limited perspective, from the Vedic perspective, that's not it. But he was definitely fight Arjuna because of his nature. He was fighting for dharma. He was fighting on to protect the citizens so that they don't fall into these habits of ill leadership that are just selfish, greedy, not to direct towards people towards their spiritual goals of life. So within that's just address, and I don't want to
Yes.
go too far off because I can't say completely, but a jihad, uh, there could be possibly a tendency where people could become overzealot. But it could also happen within Hinduism. That's what I'm going to speak on ultimately.
Yeah,
Is
I would like to say here that I have read their books, and it is clearly written that all the land belongs to Muhammad and Allah, and so you can fight, you can grab other people's land because that land was initially meant to be for Muhammad and Allah only. So any woman who is not a Muslim can be raped, and any land which is belongs to the kafirs or the non-Muslims, you can snatch it. It is written in their holy books, so it is written clearly in many verses.
okay. Well,
So
I'll spin it off onto Sanatana perspective. Is in the Sri Upanishad, it said Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. And then the following verse after that one. But that one's just talking
yes,
about that. Everything is owned and controlled by the Lord. He's the complete emanations of all. He stays complete. But then the following verse talks about how ultimately everything is God's property. Everything is God's property. And if we try to claim it for our own self, then and not appreciate what has been gifted to us as a portion or you know a, a gift from God, whatever land, whatever wealth, whatever we've been gifted for us, then and we try to take it unnecessarily. This is what wars go on. We see in Ukraine and Russia. They're trying to
yes,
take something and claim it out themselves rather than just understanding this is God's property. And God is has unlimited variety. So whether it comes to tr- spiritual traditions, whether it comes to different color of skin, different faith, different this, if we're trying to usurp others in the sense of like dominate it and claim it for myself, and not understanding them as God's children also, then we're missing the point. We're missing the point. Whether you're a Hindu doing that, whether you're a Muslim doing that, whether you're a Christian doing that, whether you're just a materialist doing that, you're missing the point. That this is God's property. I have to see it as sacred and not dominate over others to claim it as my own. That would be what I say. I don't want to say about them that. I want to say
yeah,
it on a universal
they
scale.
just claim it in the name of their own god, which is a fictionary god. So,
I'll say
anyways, the
God is
next,
one. God is one
yeah,
for sure. God
yeah,
is one.
yeah.
I can agree on that.
Next question is by this lawyer. His name is Jitendra Kumar, and he's asking, Please make us understand the difference between Tyaga and Sannyasa according to chapter 18.3.4.5 of Gita.
Nice. Tyaga and Sannyasa. Well, let me crack open the Gita just so I know
Yes.
exactly what reference you're talking about. I
If
can
you
give it
want, I can open it here also on digitally if you want.
open it so everyone can see it, but I got it right here. But
Yeah.
ultimately, um, I'll just talk on this from what I know. I won't read it all because I know we got limited time. But ultimately, there's two types of people. Uh, we can call it, sannyasi, tyag. There's boga, and then there's tyag. So tyag is like renunciation. Sannyas. Okay, let me address this one first. There's boga and there's tyag. Boga means the realm of enjoying this world. That I want to enjoy this world. Tiag is I want to renounce this world. I want to step away from it because I see it's it's illusion. It's like this. And then there's always this pendulum swing between people who do they want to enjoy this world, and then when they have frustration through enjoyment, they want to renounce this world. And it's a pendulum swing. But the real middle point is bhakti. Is understanding that this world is not meant for my enjoyment. And that I don't have to just renounce the world entirely because it's illusion, but understanding the proper way in which that this world is made up of God's energy. This is God's energy, and that if I'm if I'm uh, claiming it as my own and not understanding the source of it, then I fall under illusion that this is for my enjoyment. But if we understand that it's Krishna's energy or God's energy, then I connect everything back to God. And that way, and then the difference between a sannyas, there's many different types of sannyas. So you'd have to see in accordance with that. There's some sannyasis that just say renounce the whole world, it's all false, and relationships are false, this, that. In the bhakti tradition, a sannyasi means someone who has dedicated their lives fully towards spirit, towards spiritual activities. They're pretty much dead to the world in the sense that they don't have material aspirations to get ahead of the game, to cheat other people. Their main aspiration in life is to connect people back to God. And it's not all about renunciation. Tiag is all about renunciation. If I'm getting these terminologies correct, is that correct, Preeti? Because I'm limited. I'm no
Yes.
scholar. I'm no pundit. I don't even
No.
know Sanskrit.
Yes, yes. You're quite right.
So then, within the Bhakti tradition, that there's different levels of sannyasis, and we ultimately you don't have to become a sannyasi to become God realized either. The main criteria for God realization is to understand those three truths that I talked about first: Brahman, Paramatma, Bhagavan, and understand that Bhagavan is the source of all of those, and then to try to connect to God through that devotional aptitude. If you just try to enjoy this world, you're going to have frustration. If you just try to renounce this world, there's going to be frustration. But there are bona fide paths to try to break attachments, step away from the world. It can be very conducive. But there's also the middle path, which which is a path directly towards God. But it's through a cultivation of love in the heart for God and all of God's children, whatever tradition they come from, wherever they come from, and we have to cultivate that. That's the bhakti perspective. There might be other ones that people have heard. Growing up in India, there's so many varieties, but I'm going to be speaking specifically from the Bhagavad Gita as it is, from the Srimad Bhagavatam, and from the great teachers that I've came in contact, which is what spiritual practice do I want to implement in my life, and how do I want to put that out in the world? If I'm creating conflict between others and developing hate in my heart, this is not bhakti. And this will lead to more division in the world rather than calmly discussing spiritual truths. And then ultimately, because everyone's an individual and they're going to connect to God in a particular way, that we have to understand and we have to leave some room for other people. Some people are going to connect to God through the Vedic culture. Some people are going to find that Lord Jesus is who I want to connect to, and I feel a spiritual connection with this representative of God. And I won't touch beyond that, but that's at least how I'm trying to cultivate my spiritual perspective. But I'm still completely sold after reading Vedanta, having it clearly explained to me that this allows us to appreciate other cultures, but dive deeply within this unlimited realm of vast spiritual knowledge, which gets right to the essence, right to the point, and helps us connect with our original divine source, Krishna. I
Yeah,
don't know if I addressed that or if that was a really
you
roundabout
you
way,
you,
but
you explained beautifully.
anyways,
So I wanted to ask you, like, what differences did you find in Christianity and Hinduism?
I'll start with the difference and then I'll start with the similarities because that's what I like to do.
Okay.
Um, or yeah, we'll start with the negative, then bring it to the positive. So ultimately, growing up in a Roman, like in a Catholic school, I noticed the main because I also had this little tinge of like ahimsa culture, Vedic culture, where I grew up vegetarian, and that just completely made sense to me. That understanding that we're all God's children, and there's life even within animals, that they have a spark of consciousness. What is consciousness? Consciousness is a symptom of the soul. And consciousness is pervasive in life, whether it's a human, whether it's an alien, whatever, whether it's an animal, or even in a plant. That's as far as like Vedic teachings will go, that even plants have life. Their consciousness is less developed. They,
They
the
have
animals is
emotions.
less developed.
Animals have emotions.
Animals have emotions, but it's a little less developed, but they're still living entities. They're God's children, and we have to protect them. Uh, and then humans, we have more refined, developed consciousness where we can understand spiritual subject matters. It's not just eating, sleeping, mating, defending. So ultimately, that was a big difference that I saw, according to like what I was raised with a little bit, and then the like growing up in a Catholic school was that they didn't see animals as being uh, living entities. I would hear that would say this is a we have dominion over these animals, which means they're our property. They're meant for us to enjoy. Whereas the Vedic spin-off on it was that these dominion would be more translated like these we have dominion, which means we have to protect. These are our dependents. We're meant to protect these living entities, take care of them. So that was a big spin, but then the similarities that now I've found to appreciate. Before I was like turned off by, you know, Catholic school, whatever you grew up with it. I was turned off, but as I've been diving deeper in the Bhagavad Gita, uh I've found the similarities of that God is one. We're meant to connect to God through love. Ultimately, we are all God's children. And then some of the 10 commandments like thou shalt not kill, we also shouldn't kill the animals and eat their flesh, because everything that we have affects our consciousness. Everything we hear affects our consciousness, positive, negative. If everything that we eat affects our consciousness, so that's where I
And
found a
compare
little
this
more.
to halal. Compare this to halal slaughter, where the animal is given, like, cut slowly and left bleeding and crying for hours. The Islamic people and even the Jewish kosher meat, they are the extreme uh, pain giving to animals before eating them. And therefore I tell my audience to ban, like, to uh, I forbid them from eating halal meat or halal certified products or so on.
um You know, I'm not so astute in answering like questions when it comes to like the Quran. I've read a little bit about it, but I'm not so astute like you guys would be. And personally, I would really like to connect with, like, say, some people who practice Islam, that have the mother faith. I would like to chat with them on a personal level to see. yeah, that might be an aspect. Just like in Vedic culture, there's an aspect where animal slaughter is acceptable, but that's acceptable when those people understand that there's consequences to it. And in the Vedic understanding that some people say some mantras, worship to Kalima, and then but the mantras that they're really saying is that like I'm gonna offer this, I'm gonna kill this living entity and eat their flesh, but
This is a myth.
really,
This is a myth,
well,
and
people do it.
they have made this is wrong. Actually, goddess Kali is the it's a form, the feminine form, because God has both masculine energy as well as the
Yeah.
feminine energy. So Shiva is with Shakti, and Shakti is the female energy, and that is the Kali. And when she had to destroy the demons, she became the form of Kali. Now people who are non-vegetarians, who don't eat any vegetables, and they want to please the goddess and offer a part of their food, they offer non-veg items. But Kali, none of the Puranas in they ask you to kill an animal and please the goddess. It is a myth that they have developed and made this to um, what you call to defame Hinduism and to bring out the ugly nature of their own religion, and say that, look, this is what is happening in Hinduism. If you ask any Muslim person any question, when he doesn't have an answer, he will never reply you with any answer, but he will ask a question on your religion, and he will try to bring your gods and goddess to that level of their cruelty and try to equate that wrongly. Like, they are such big liars, and they are so intolerant as well, so they will never give you a reply. And they have done many kind of what adulterations in our books. Kali
Well,
doesn't ask to kill anybody. It is wrong. But
yeah,
she killed demons in the past.
yeah.
And
So,
she had that kind of form in which she is looking extremely angry, and she is out to get the blood of the demon. And there's this demon. He was given a boon that wherever his blood fell, there were another version of him would it will give birth to another version of him. So there were several Rakt Beej developing. Like
mm,
every time a drop of blood fell, he grew up one more of him. So there were thousands of him. So Kali destroyed him, and she drank the blood so it didn't fell on the ground, and another Rakt Beej was born. So these were the stories attached with Kali, and she never asked to kill any animal. That is wrong.
well, I'll teach you a mantra. Do you want to learn the mantra that I like to use? Say, I'll teach you it, and you can try it afterwards. Say, I live to be corrected. This is my mantra I use, quote unquote. I live to be
Uh,
corrected. I don't know
I
everything about it, but from my limited understanding, that ultimately within the Vedic paradigm, they touch bases on all different aspects of people of different consciousness levels so that they can gradually elevate their spiritual consciousness. So, you know, I know that there might be whether it's in Shastra or not, there are people who practice it and they're meant to, do it, and slowly that might give some elevation because they're approaching it through the Vedic paradigm. Uh, and you know but
And
they
nowhere in the Vedas it is written to kill an animal. In fact, animal killers are. It is said that if you kill a cow, a cow killer will go to the severest of hells.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
hell has many parts. The most severe part he will go to.
so in
And
essence,
even I used to think I was there where you are now at one time, not where exactly you are. You are very learned in Bhagavad Gita and all that. I was a misinformed Hindu, and I used to think these same things which they have propagated through movies and through media, that Kali is like this, and this Veda says you can kill and offer animals to please gods and goddesses. And I used to believe the same, and I went into Christianity for 17 years. I was a Christian, and I believed that all these things in Hinduism was true. But when I started reading the books, and when I read other books and they matched, and what was adulterated stood out completely. For example, I'll tell you, in Manusmriti, Manu was a vegetarian. He has said that all kinds of meat eating should be not done, should be prohibited. He prohibited from eating any kind of meat, and he said that those who eat fish actually eat every kind of meat, because fish is the most severest form of eating any kind of animal meat. And the next shloka after that, immediate next shloka after that says, oh, you offer the meat, the fish to the goddess, to gods, something like that. So you know exactly that this is a later on added a shloka to make our books bad, like adulterated. So, because the previous shlok says not to eat meat, and especially the fish, and exactly after that, the shloka says that eat the offer the fish, and you can eat this kind of fish. So that is wrong, and you can make that out. Any average person of average intelligence can make out that this has been added later on. So that is how that they have done all this to our books.
I live to be corrected. Thank you so much for that. And ultimately,
I
in
And my
essence,
mantra also, one second, I'll tell you, like your mantra is I live to be corrected. My mantra is continuous improvement. It's a Japanese term called Kaizen. I used to teach operations management. So that's when I learned this term. And ever since that, I'm continuously trying to improve myself every day.
Kaizen.
Kaizen, yes.
Very good. Well, that's the goal of the human form of
Yes.
life, is that we're meant to improve ourselves. And what is a brahmana? A brahmana is someone who's very broad-minded. A kripana is someone who's very cripple-minded. They just have this tunnel vision of my limited
I
perspective.
like that word. Now I can use that on these people who come with the.
Well, it's just a Shastric term, but
Yeah.
us ourselves, we have to become very broad-minded, which you know, th- in essence, whatever we were talking about before, the principle is still the same. The way the material world is set up, that there's there's good, bad reaction. These things are there. So ultimately, everything has an equal and opposite reaction, and Bhagavad Gita will go as far to say that meat's just out of the question in Vedic knowledge. Like for people who really want to, you know, elevate their consciousness in a subtle, spiritual, soft, sentimental way, really refrain from what we take in our thing. But they'll go as far to say that even as far as fruits, vegetables, so on, if you're not offering them to Bhagavan, then you're just eating sin. You're just getting a whole lot of bad karma. So you have to transcendentalize the process by making it into prasad. Every single thing you eat, everything, not just going to the temple and getting a little tiny piece of sweet, but at home, you make that extra endeavor to control the senses because that helps in our spiritual path. What we eat, controlling our senses, and then we make it as an offering to this sweet baby Krishna, or to God, ultimately. So the principle is there. Whether it is, yeah, we want to reduce as much harm in the world we can. So then we take up to a sattvic lifestyle, or a sattvic diet, which means stuff that is not going to entice passion or cover our consciousness with the different gunas, tamagun, rajagun, but we want to be more in sattva. And then from sattva, we can go to vishuddha sattva, which is this pure goodness. This it's more of a transcendental outlook on life rather than just, oh, I'm so good, I'm so elevated, I'm better than everyone. That's goodness. That's sattva gun. But we want to go beyond sattva gun, vishuddha sattva. So I don't know what time we're supposed to wrap up on. How long do you usually go here
How
for,
long ever
PT?
you feel comfortable.
Well, I'm at your service. So however I can serve and help, please let me know. If there's any other questions, we can do a couple more, and then I actually have a program today that I have to go to, definitely in 30
Sure.
minutes. But
I read a question about bhakti. Somebody was asking this Mr. Savage is asking, please explain about chapter 12 Bhagavad Gita verses the five stages of bhakti. Is that already been told?
nice. So, to my knowledge, without me reading it, I think in the 12th chapter, at least in this, it's kind of translated to devotional service. So, these are different ways that we can apply the principles of bhakti in our lives. So, ultimately, the gold standard, like I said earlier, the gold standard of any religion, any spiritual practice is to serve God unmotivated, uninterrupted, with no material motivation. Lord, my sweet Lord, I just want to serve you to please you. That is the gold standard. And that's what Krishna's asking, one to do in the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And then he gives some concessions because in the Vedic knowledge, this is what we go back to our last question is that there's always concessions based on people because of their certain mentality. They have a mentality to do a certain thing. So that we get in the conversation about meat again, but I don't need to go there. But the certain concession here is okay. You can, if you can't do that, if you can't surrender fully to God, if you can't do that, then work for me. If you can't work for me, then so on and so forth. Let me bust out the actual things, and I'll just read them off. So then we all have a clear understanding. I'll read them in English because I'm no pundit G. So from 3 to 12. So ultimately, but those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all pervading, inconceivable, unchangeable, fixed, and immovable, the impersonal conception of the absolute truth, by controlling the various senses and equally disposed to everyone, such persons engage in the welfare and at last achieve me. But for those whose minds are attached to the unmanifest, impersonal feature of the supreme, advancement is very troublesome. To make progress in that discipline is always very difficult. But those who are worshiping me, giving up their activities unto me, and being devoted to me with devotion, engaged in devotional service, always meditating upon me, having fixed their minds upon me, O son of Pritha, for them I am the swift deliverer from the ocean of birth and death.
I think
Just,
I'll show it on my screen here. It'll be easier for
yeah,
you. It'll be
it,
easier. You can read from here, maybe.
okay, perfect.
This
Let's
is
do that.
chapter.
Okay, you got a
It's
different Gita
chapter
here.
12 or chapter 13?
I think they
Chapter,
said 12. 12,
okay,
text
12
3.
here. And
Um, so ultimately, in essence, God is saying that you completely become fixed on me. If you can't do that, or there's the feature of completely fixed on the impersonal Brahman, which is like the all-pervasive energy of God, and that's how I want to connect. We say the Brahma Jyoti. We want to connect to the Brahma Jyoti, but for some people, that's very difficult. That's very difficult to connect to the all-pervasive energy of God. That there's nothing to fix our mind upon, because our mind likes to be fixed on some certain thing. So then he gives the thing. Okay, then also fix your mind on the personal form. This is when the deity form comes into play. That we can fix on the deities of God because the mind is attracted to form and God has a transcendental form. So fix your mind on that. If you can't do that, then cultivate, some regulative principles in your life of bhakti. Try to become a little regulated where you can start to gradually fix your mind on, through the intelligence on me, and then you can come to success. If you can't do that, then just work for me. Work in the spirit of devotion. If you can't just become fixed through your intelligence, then work in a practical way in this world that I maybe offer some results to God. I'm gonna have a different maybe
no,
thing
it's the
here,
same. It's the same.
and
If
then
you cannot steadily fix the mind on me, Arjuna, then seek to attain me through the yoga of practice. If
yes,
you are unequal even to the pursuit of such practice, be intent to work for me, you shall attain perfection in the shape of my realization, even by performing actions for my sake.
yeah. So then, if we're working in this, we're working in this world naturally, but make it as an offering to God, and then that's a gradual step up. The gold standard is just fully devoted. That's people who just take sannyas and they're able to serve constantly. If not, then try to cultivate knowledge about God, and then if not, then work in this world as a service to God. And then if you can't do that, then you're unable to work in that, then just start giving something in charity. Be a little detached from the results of your work and give something in charity, because that is a gradual step up, and these are stepping stones to pure bhakti. So we got to keep stepping up the practice. And then, you know, and then the final statement kind of there, which I really like, this: knowledge is better than practice. Without discernment, meditation on God or the superior to knowledge, and renunciation of the fruit of actions is even superior than meditation. But for peace immediately follows from renunciation. So then that's when Krishna gives the concessions of, okay, there's this level, there's this level, there's this level. Wherever you're at, start from where you're at and start working on that, so you can move up the spiritual steps back home, back to Godhead. So God is, when I talk about Krishna, this is literally the God of love, which is so merciful to the conditioned souls. He's so merciful to living entities that he gives them an access point by which we can practically engage our senses in the service. And this is where bhakti comes into play. There's a beautiful shloka from the Chaitanya Charitamrita within the bhakti tradition that we say, Sarvopadi vinirmuktam tapratvena nirmalam hrishikena hrishikesha sevanam bhakti uchate. That ultimately, when the sarvopadi vinirmuktam, when one engages in the service of the Supreme, there's two factors that come into play. They 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 give up these upadis, these bodily designations. I'm a Irish, Scottish, Canadian, that this, or I'm an Indian, I'm a Muslim, I'm this. You start to give up these designations that and then you understand your true identity, that I'm a spirit soul. I'm meant to serve God, and that's where we want to go towards. Sometimes, even in like religious life, we can get so on the quarrel that I'm better than you, you're better than me, or never you're better than me because I'm the best, obviously. This is the mentality that can come from knowledge. So knowledge is limited because it can create the false ego. We want to go past that. We want to cultivate bhakti. This is what we want. We want to surrender to God in a way. And he's given us so many access points where we can try that. So just understand where you're at and work on it from there. That's really what this chapter is kind of in essence talking about. That ultimately, try to get to that full surrender. If you can't do full surrender, cultivate knowledge. You know, get do that. Do meditation, so on and so forth. And these will be things that step us up the spiritual ladder. And then eventually we'll get to the top, and then we'll start to see other people as actual spiritual beings, not just as a body, not just as my religious denomination, not just as a man, a woman, a dog. You'll see this is a spiritual spark of the Supreme. And I'm meant to serve this individual as a representative of God. So this is the highest. This is the highest standard. I don't We can argue about it all day if you want, but that's what I'm going to say. That's the gold standard. So, and we come to that gold standard by keeping in contact with transcendental sound vibration through this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra: Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Through this transcendental sound vibration, focusing on God's names, and through hearing this wisdom, it'll start to gradually transform the mind. But we got to be careful, because while we cultivate spiritual knowledge, and this seed of bhakti, this spiritual creeper. Anyone who's gardeners, they know what I'm talking about. When you're trying to grow a plant, we're trying to grow a plant of devotion to God. When you're growing the plant, there's weeds that pop up on the way also. So we got to be like a spiritual gardener and understand how to pull out the weeds that pop up while our devotional creeper or our devotional plant is growing. And those things can be resentment, hate, uh, anger, frustration, these quarreling qualities. What do we want to become? Do we want to become conflict conscious of the differences, or do we want to become Krishna conscious, God conscious? That's what I kind of think. And ultimately, when I think about it, I'm like, I want to become God conscious. It's not that we neglect differences. We can understand the differences, but then we have to understand the essences. Where is this leading us to? Is this leading us to hatred, or is this leading us to love? And just look at the opposite sides. If you've ever been attacked, angered, frustrated, and pointed out, and so on, see how that makes you feel. Is that how we want to be, like being practitioners of Sanatana Dharma, or do we want to be transcendental personalities that bring truth to the forefront, that we're not ignorant to truth, but we always keep this in the back of the mind. Sometimes we have to be a little challenging, straightforward, to the point, but we have to cultivate that sweet bhakti, that sweetness in our heart also. Otherwise, we could become a very hard-hearted in our spiritual practice. So those are just some random things I wanted to say that I'm trying to do. I'm falling short a lot of the time,
Yes.
but I hope there's something that the
This
listeners.
session was very, very knowledgeable, and you said some things were very good. And I think the audience got a lot from today's session. Thank you
Preeti,
so much for
this
coming here and
this is
giving
awesome
the.
what you're doing, connecting so many people to Sanatana Dharma. I see this chat board just going wild. I can't even keep up with it. It's amazing that somehow you're trying to render a service to connect people to Vedic knowledge, to wisdom. And what I found personally, what works nice when connecting with other cultures, other spiritual traditions, is that you can find the common grounds, and then you can address the differences rather than
Yes,
pinning us against each other, where
yes,
we want to,
definitely.
you know, go to
That's
war.
what
Nothing
Hinduism
like
was
that.
doing all along.
Yes.
That's what Hindus were doing because they believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. But lately, we have come to know that this religion, Islam, especially, I'm talking about, has in its books written that go and kill the non-Muslims, and that is why there are so much of terrorist activities around, and that's why we condemn it.
Yeah, we don't want to kill nobody. That's for sure. We
Yes.
want to develop, friendships, and
Well, this
that.
session has come to an end, so I wouldn't take this. This person is asking this shloka. Your two questions have been answered, so you should be satisfied. Otherwise, they'll keep on asking you questions after
Wow, you
questions.
guys are you guys are enthusiastic. You guys such an enthusiastic crew here, Mother Preeti, and I really humbly wanted to appreciate you for what you're doing, and somehow it was a divine arrangement that we met, and if I can render any service in the future, please let me know.
Definitely.
And I hope we can connect in
Thank you so
person sometime
much.
soon also.
Thank you so much for coming here and speaking to my audience.
All glories to your service, and all glories to Bhagavan. All glories to the audience. Stay happy, stay blissful, stay kind. This is a really key thing. We gotta stay kind, but cultivate some spiritual substance in your life. Whoever's not on this board, if you're not chanting one round of the Hare Krishna mantra every day, try to apply that in your life. See what comes of it. See what spiritual fruits start to come in your life. And if you have questions, you can ask Preeti. You can connect with me, and we'll try to be of some service somehow. So, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Everyone in the audience, please put your hands up in the
Hare
sky and say
Krishna, Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Mother Preeti.
Thank you. So, I don't know if we should have a meeting after this or. Anyways, thank you all for watching. I will stop this session now. Please keep chanting Hare Rama, Hare Krishna. And yes, we have to do self defense. That is very important. But we don't like to attack others, and especially for materialistic purposes. We just want to be, we believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. But if anybody comes to attack us, we will definitely be good in self defense. Jai Hindu Rashtra.